Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Strategic Labs, the channel where we deeply analyze the ideas, narratives, and strategies behind the documents. We are Sarah and Mark. Today, we are going to dive into the material we have on the table. Before we start, please leave a like, share the episode, subscribe to the channel, and remember to check the description for the links to access the original material.
Yeah, and the material we're analyzing today is really going to challenge how you view everyday news stories.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, imagine a scenario where a foreign military, they don't even need to fire a single missile to ground an entire fleet of next-generation fighter jets.
Right. Or, they don't need to blockade a port to cut off a nation's power grid.
Exactly, and they don't need to parachute spies into a capital city to compromise high-ranking intelligence officers. They can do all of this silently, systematically, just because, well, 10 years ago, a mid-level subcontractor clicked a fake email. Or maybe a developing nation accepted a free highway.
Yeah, it sounds like a spy thriller. But that is the reality we are unpacking today. We're looking at Edward H. Whitmore's book, Covert Operations Series China. Real covert operations.
And the core thesis here is just sweeping. Whitmore argues that what we often perceive as isolated hacks or random cases of corporate espionage are actually part of a systemic, highly integrated global strategy.
Right. A strategy that the book argues is designed to bypass conventional warfare entirely. And the author's stated goal is really fascinating because he takes direct aim at the public consciousness.
Oh, so, what does he mean by that?
Well, he argues that most of us walk around with this, what he calls nebulous anxiety about cyber threats.
Yeah.
We know it's happening, but it feels abstract, like bad weather.
Yeah, like something you can't really control, so you just sort of ignore it.
Exactly. But Whitmore wants to replace that anxiety with grounded operational comprehension. The material forces you to realize that the modern battlefield has, fundamentally shifted.
It's no longer just geographical borders or visible armies, right?
Right. According to the book's logic, the battlefield now stretches across digital networks, corporate laboratories, university classrooms, and even diaspora communities.
Let's pause right there, though, because, I want to subject this to some heavy scrutiny. The immediate pushback, and I think it's a natural one for anyone listening to this deep dive, is to ask, isn't this just standard international statecraft?
That's the big question, yeah.
Because every major superpower has engaged in espionage. Every advanced nation today conducts cyber operations. They gather intelligence on economic rivals. The great game never ended. It just got a digital upgrade. So is the framework Whitmore outlines actually a new paradigm?
Well, Whitmore anticipates that exact skepticism in the text. He makes a crucial distinction. It's not the mere existence of espionage that's unprecedented, but the sheer scale of it.
Scale and the structure, right?
Yeah, exactly. The structural methodology and the total lack of boundaries. The book introduces this concept that is absolutely central to understanding this entire analysis, which is civil-military fusion.
Civil-military fusion. Okay, break that down for us.
So if you think about the traditional Western intelligence model, there is a distinct, legally enforced firewall. You have military intelligence, civilian intelligence, diplomacy, and the private commercial sector all separated.
Right, like if a major Western tech company develops a new algorithm, the military can't just walk in and demand they hand it over for weaponization.
Exactly. There would be a massive public legal process. But Whitmore argues that in the model he is analyzing, those lines are not just blurred, they are entirely erased.
So we are talking about a total integration of society.
Pretty much. The book posits that academic research, commercial enterprise, and military intelligence are functionally the same organism.
Wow. So under this doctrine, a telecom company laying fiber optic cables abroad and, say, a university student doing postdoc research are basically operating under the same strategic directive as a military cyber unit.
Right. It is a whole-of-society approach to intelligence gathering. And the author claims this creates a model that the West is structurally incapable of mirroring.
Because Western societies are built on that fundamental separation. That structural difference is vital to keep in mind as we dive into the specific case studies the book provides.
Yeah, and the first major case study the text takes us to is a watershed moment in cybersecurity, the 2009 Operation Aurora.
For anyone analyzing the history of digital conflict, this is often viewed as the opening salvo of a new era. The sources detail how this massive cyber attack targeted Google, along with, dozens of other major U.S. corporations.
Companies like Adobe Systems, Juniper Networks, Northrop Grumman, and the technical tradecraft detailed in the book is where you start to see the sophisticated mechanics of this strategy.
Yeah, they didn't just brute force a password or run a generic virus. The initial vector was something called spear phishing.
And we really need to unpack what spear phishing meant back in 2009, because it was revolutionary at the time. This was not your generic, poorly spelled spam email asking for a wire transfer.
Right, it wasn't the prince offering you millions of dollars.
No, not at all. According to the text, these emails were heavily researched, meticulously crafted psychological traps. The attackers had already mapped out the corporate hierarchies of their targets.
They knew exactly who they were going after. They identified the specific software developers and network admins who held the keys to the kingdom.
Exactly. And then they crafted emails that perfectly mimicked trusted internal communications. The subject lines were tailored to the recipient's specific projects.
So once a human being just making a split-second decision, clicked a seemingly innocuous link, the payload was delivered. And that payload utilized a zero-day vulnerability in Internet Explorer.
Right, a 0 day.
Let's make sure the mechanics of a zero-day are crystal clear for you listening. Imagine you buy a brand new house with a state-of-the-art security system. A zero-day means the manufacturer of the locks accidentally left a microscopic flaw in the deadbolt.
And nobody knows about it.
Yeah.
Not the manufacturer, not the homeowner.
Right. But a highly skilled burglar has spent millions of dollars in a lab to find that exact flaw. When they use it, the alarm doesn't even trigger because the system doesn't recognize it as a breach. There is literally 0 days notice to patch it.
That analogy perfectly captures the asymmetry of the attack. Discovering and weaponizing a 0 day requires immense technical resources, usually the domain of nation-states.
And the text notes that exploiting this specific flaw allowed the attackers to execute arbitrary code simply by luring the target to a compromised website.
Yeah, the user didn't even have to download a file. Just rendering the web page was enough. And once inside the machine, they deployed custom rootkits.
Rootkits, right. For you listening, think of the kernel of an operating system as its central nervous system, the absolute core brain.
If a standard virus infects a file, your antivirus software can see it and quarantine it. But a rootkit operating at the kernel level essentially takes over the security guard's own brain.
That is terrifying. The antivirus software literally cannot see the infection because the infection is controlling what the software is allowed to see.
It is. And the patience they exhibited once they were inside is chilling. The book describes their lateral movement through the corporate networks. They didn't just smash and grab.
No, they mapped the internal architecture. They established command and control servers hidden behind complex proxy chains.
And when it came time to actually steal Google's proprietary source code, they used a slow, fragmented exfiltration process.
They broke the massive code base into tiny encrypted packets and just slipped it out amidst the normal, everyday network traffic, right?
Exactly. Over a period of weeks, specifically to ensure they didn't trigger any automated alarms that watch for massive spikes in bandwidth.
Wow. And the forensic attribution of this attack is a major focus of Whitmore's analysis. Intelligence reports cited in the book trace the digital fingerprints of Aurora back to a specific origin.
Yeah, back to the People's Liberation Army, specifically PLA Unit 61398, operating out of a nondescript building in Shanghai.
And the author spends significant time analyzing the organizational structure of this unit, noting they used a matrix management style.
Which is fascinating, because when you hear military intelligence unit, you picture a rigid, top-down bureaucracy.
Right, lots of red tape. But the book argues they were structured more like a highly agile Silicon Valley tech firm.
The text points out that this was a deliberate design to foster innovation. Operational leaders were given massive autonomy to choose their methods as long as they hit the strategic priorities.
They actively recruited from China's top technical universities, bringing in brilliant young minds in cryptography and network security.
Yeah, they fostered a culture of rapid iteration and relentless red team exercises to constantly test their own tools.
But the true revelation of Operation Aurora wasn't just how they did it, but why they did it. The motives reveal that civil-military fusion we talked about earlier.
Right, the book highlights that this campaign had a stark dual intent.
While one part of the operation was siphoning off high-value corporate source code for economic advantage, they were simultaneously targeting the Gmail accounts of Chinese human rights activists.
And the author emphasizes that this dual targeting is the defining characteristic of the new paradigm. It wasn't two separate operations.
It was a single cyber campaign serving two vastly different masters. On one hand, the economic imperative, and on the other, internal security and suppressing political dissent.
It perfectly illustrates how a military cyber unit functions as a tool for both the industrial complex and the state's domestic control apparatus.
To put the gravity of this into perspective, think about that burglar analogy again. It's like realizing a burglar didn't just pick your lock to steal your TV.
Right. While they were inside, they silently copied the master blueprint to the entire city's security infrastructure.
Exactly. And at the same time, they installed hidden cameras in the bedrooms of anyone who might speak out against the mayor. You suddenly realize the threat is the total compromise of both infrastructure and personal privacy.
The cybersecurity industry certainly had that exact realization in the aftermath of Aurora. The text notes that this attack shattered the foundational assumptions of corporate cyber defense.
Prior to 2009, the strategy was perimeter defense, right? Build a tall firewall, install antivirus, and assume everything inside is safe.
But Operation Aurora proved that against a well-resourced state actor, the perimeter will always eventually fall.
And the book argues this was the catalyst for the industry shifting towards zero trust architecture.
Yeah, the core philosophy of zero trust is simple, but exhausting. Assume the network is already compromised. You verify every single interaction, every time.
Because, as the analysis transitions to show, the ultimate vulnerability isn't a piece of software, it's the human being sitting at the keyboard.
And that realization leads us directly into the next phase of Whitmore's analysis, moving from stealing corporate code to the massive harvesting of human data.
This section of the book is where the scale becomes almost difficult to comprehend. The text focuses heavily on two colossal breaches.
The 2015 Office of Personnel Management, or OPM, breach, and the Marriott Starwood Hotel breach, which went undetected for 4 years.
4 years. Let's start with OPM, because within the intelligence community, this is still viewed as a catastrophic failure.
The book states that the attackers compromised the personal files of over 21 million individuals, but the raw number doesn't tell the story.
No, we have to look at what was stolen. They didn't just grab a mailing list. They targeted the databases managing the U.S. government's background investigations, specifically the SF-86 forms.
And for anyone listening who hasn't encountered one, calling the SF-86 a questionnaire is a massive understatement. It's an exhaustive document, often well over 100 pages long.
Yeah, if you are applying for security clearance, the government demands to know absolutely everything about you. You have to list every place you've ever lived, every foreign national you have ever spoken to.
Your complete financial history, massive debts, bankruptcies.
You have to hand over psychiatric evaluations, detail past drug use, disclose affairs, gambling problems, basically any indiscretion that could theoretically be used to blackmail you.
You are required by law to document every single vulnerability you have ever had and hand it to the government. And the book notes, they also stole the millions of digital fingerprints associated with these files.
Whitmore argues that the OPM breach was an unparalleled intelligence coup because they stole the foundational trust architecture of the U.S. government.
They didn't just steal data. They stole the psychological blueprints of the nation's defense apparatus.
And the text details the mechanics of the breach, noting that the hackers utilized that same trickle methodology we saw in Aurora.
Right. They didn't need exotic 0 days here. They exploited painfully unpatched vulnerabilities in outdated legacy systems used by the government.
They executed basic SQL injection attacks, manipulating the database queries to bypass authentication, and then quietly siphoned the massive data sets off in small increments.
Encrypting the data and routing it through a labyrinth of international proxy servers over many months.
So an adversary now possesses the deepest, darkest secrets of 21 million current and former government employees. The strategic value of that is terrifying.
It is. But then the book shifts focus to the Marriott Starwood breach. 500 million guest records compromised.
Let's really analyze this, because the immediate question is why? Why does a nation-state military apparatus care about 500 million hotel reservations?
Right. It seems so mundane compared to the OPM data.
Exactly. I can understand why they want the SF-86 files, but why dedicate immense cyber resources to finding out if I requested a king-size bed in Chicago in 2016?
That is the exact question policymakers were asking. And the book addresses it by introducing a concept called the intelligence multiplier effect.
The intelligence multiplier effect. Okay, explain that.
On its own, a single hotel reservation is trivial. But the text explains that advanced intelligence agencies view raw data the way a refinery views crude oil.
It has to be processed and alloyed with other data sets to become valuable.
Exactly. The Marriott data included real names, passport numbers, exact arrival and departure dates, loyalty account numbers, and specific room preferences.
So if we apply the multiplier effect, how does this actually function operationally?
According to Whitmore's analysis, The true power is realized when you overlay the data sets. You take the OPM data, which acts as your master key. It tells you exactly who the U.S. intelligence officers are, complete with their personal vulnerabilities.
And then you cross-reference that master list with the Marriott travel database.
Suddenly, you don't just have a list of spies, you have a dynamic map of their global movements.
You know exactly what dates a specific diplomat is in a foreign capital, which hotel chain they prefer, and even their specific room preferences.
It's like someone stealing the guest list to an incredibly exclusive, highly secure VIP party.
That's bad enough, but then they also hack the central server and steal the real-time GPS data of every single Uber driving to that party.
Exactly. The danger isn't just possessing the two lists. The danger is what happens when you overlay them.
If you are a foreign operative, you no longer have to guess where a target will be. You can anticipate their movements months in advance.
You can book the hotel room right next door to them. You can physically intercept them or set up localized surveillance to target their specific devices on the hotel Wi-Fi.
The author points out that this data integration allows for tracking high-value targets with terrifying precision. But the strategic implications go much deeper than just tracking.
Right, consider the human vulnerabilities.
Yeah, if the OPM data reveals that a mid-level defense official has massive undisclosed financial debt from a gambling problem.
And you see from the Marriott data that they frequently travel alone to a specific city in Asia.
You have just been handed the perfect, ready-made blueprint for a tailored recruitment or blackmail operation.
The book argues that this methodology transforms what looks like a standard corporate data breach into a devastatingly effective strategic human intelligence asset.
They mapped the global patterns of diplomatic and corporate travel to optimize their counterintelligence operations. That analysis completely reframes the modern conversation around data privacy.
It really does. We usually think of a data breach in terms of identity theft or credit card fraud.
But Whitmore is arguing that our personal data is actually providing the puzzle pieces for global geopolitical counterintelligence.
And speaking of pieces of a puzzle, the book transitions from the theft of personal histories to the theft of the absolute cutting edge of military hardware.
Yes. The massive data exfiltration surrounding the F-35 Lightning II program.
The section dissecting the F-35 data theft is perhaps one of the most consequential examples of industrial espionage detailed in the text.
The F-35 is widely considered the pinnacle of U.S. air dominance. It's not just a fast jet, it is a flying supercomputer.
Right, it integrates advanced stealth capabilities, highly classified avionics, and unprecedented sensor fusion. But the book meticulously details how operatives managed to exfiltrate massive technical libraries regarding its design.
The technical specifics of what was stolen are staggering. The book lists CAD models, which are the exact digital, three-dimensional blueprints of the aircraft's physical structure.
They stole the highly classified chemical formulas for the stealth radar absorbent coatings.
They compromised the sensor fusion algorithms, the code that allows the plane to absorb data from radar, infrared, and electronic warfare sensors, and present a single picture to the pilot.
They even stole the telemetry data for the Pratt & Whitney engine, and details on something called bidirectional growth ceramic matrix composites, or BGCMCs.
Let's isolate that last item, the BGCMCs, because it really highlights the depth of the espionage. When a jet travels at supersonic speeds, the friction generates immense heat.
Which creates a massive infrared signature that enemy missiles can lock onto.
Right. And according to the text, these proprietary ceramic matrix composites are pivotal for thermal management, hiding that heat, and for radar signature suppression within the engine exhaust.
If an adversarial nation wants to reverse engineer a stealth fighter, simply looking at photos isn't enough.
No, understanding the exact metallurgical recipes and manufacturing processes of those composites is absolutely essential to replicating the low observable features.
But the immediate question any logical person would ask is, how on earth did they get all this? The Pentagon's internal networks are among the most heavily fortified digital fortresses on the planet.
The book explains that the attackers were smart enough not to hit the Pentagon directly. Instead, they utilized a strategy of comprehensive supply chain mapping.
Right, because the F-35 program is not built in one building. It's a sprawling, global initiative relying on thousands of independent suppliers.
The attackers bypassed the heavily defended prime contractors and systematically targeted the smaller, less secure subcontractors.
The Tier 2 or Tier 3 fabricators who manufacture a specific valve or a specific composite component.
These smaller companies hold critical pieces of the puzzle, but they simply do not have the multi-million-dollar cybersecurity budgets of the Department of Defense.
And the author details how the operatives used a blended approach of cyber intrusions and human insiders to compromise these weaker links.
They deployed highly targeted spear phishing campaigns against the employees of these subcontractors, installed persistent network implants, and crucially, they didn't just steal the files once and leave.
No, they established a living intelligence stream.
Yeah, as the engineers refined the F-35 designs over several years, the stolen data was continually and silently updated on the exfiltration servers.
They were essentially watching the multi-billion-dollar research and development process unfold in real time.
The strategic impact of this cannot be overstated. Whitmore argues it represents a severe structural erosion of U.S. technological superiority.
By acquiring this granular data, the rival state was able to leapfrog decades of incredibly costly research, development, and testing.
The text explicitly draws a line from this stolen technology to the vastly accelerated development of China's own next-generation stealth fighters, the J-20 and the J-31.
Fighters which aviation experts note display aerodynamic design elements remarkably similar to the F-35.
It alters the economic reality of military development. One nation spends billions inventing the technology. The other spends a fraction of that stealing the blueprints, allowing them to redirect those saved billions into mass production.
But the text raises an even more alarming point. By possessing the exact schematics of the F-35's radar cross-section, the adversary doesn't just know how to build a copycat plane.
Right. They possess the exact data required to optimize their own counter-stealth radar arrays and tailor their electronic warfare tactics specifically to defeat the F-35.
They didn't just steal the weapon, they stole the instruction manual on exactly how to neutralize it before it ever flies into combat.
It is an asymmetric advantage born entirely from subterfuge rather than original domestic innovation. It forces the U.S. and its allies to spend billions more on countermeasures to protect an aircraft that was supposed to be practically invisible.
Exactly. And this brings us to a really crucial pivot in Whitmore's analysis. We have been deeply focused on the digital realm, the Aurora hacks, the SQL injections at OPM, the supply chain breaches.
But the book emphasizes that the digital battlefield is only half of the equation.
The author states that the heart of modern covert operations beats strongest where human networks intertwine with technology.
If they can leverage a digital vulnerability to steal a blueprint, what happens when they leverage a human vulnerability to steal the entire mind of the researcher?
This leads us into the book's critical analysis of how academia and traditional human intelligence are systematically weaponized.
The text dedicates a substantial portion to exploring this human terrain, focusing heavily on state-sponsored talent recruitment programs.
The most prominent example analyzed is the Thousand Talents Program, or TTP.
If you read the official literature, the TTP sounds like a standard, highly prestigious global academic initiative. It was launched around 2008 to attract elite scientists and engineers to collaborate with Chinese institutions.
But Whitmore's analysis strips away that benign framing. The book argues that the TTP functions by design as a state-directed technology transfer pipeline.
Whitmore details how the program operates precisely at the nexus of innovation policy and intelligence objectives.
The recruiters do not target generic academics. They specifically target leading experts in emerging dual-use technologies, fields like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, advanced aerospace materials.
And the text claims that Western participants are aggressively incentivized. We are talking about highly lucrative personal salaries, massive unrestricted laboratory funding, free housing, elite academic prestige.
But the critical mechanism of the program lies in its structural setup. Recruits are heavily encouraged and often contractually mandated to maintain dual affiliations.
This is where the friction happens. It means a top-tier researcher keeps their primary, highly cleared job in a Western national laboratory or an Ivy League university, while secretly holding a secondary appointment at an institution abroad.
The book argues this creates the perfect, invisible conduit for funneling proprietary research and early-stage technological breakthroughs directly back to Beijing.
Because the researcher is physically walking the data out the door in their head or on a flash drive, it completely bypasses traditional export controls and digital firewalls.
To the researcher, they might rationalize it as standard global scientific collaboration,
Hmm.
but the book asserts that the state views that researcher as an active intelligence collection asset.
The author points out how this strategy brilliantly exploits the inherent structural openness of Western academia.
Western universities fundamentally pride themselves on collaboration, open source publication, and the free exchange of ideas across borders.
According to the text, the Thousand Talents program weaponizes that very collaborative ethos, deliberately blurring the lines between legitimate scholarship and covert intellectual property theft.
And the academic infiltration extends beyond just the hard sciences. The book also subjects the Confucius Institutes to intense scrutiny.
On paper, these are cultural centers funded by Hanban, which is an affiliate of the Chinese Ministry of Education. Their stated mission is simply to teach Mandarin language classes and promote cultural understanding.
It sounds like the Alliance Française or the Goethe Institute. However, Whitmore's analysis paints a vastly different picture.
The text cites numerous intelligence assessments suggesting that beneath this benign cultural exterior, these institutes serve as strategic on-the-ground nodes for influence and surveillance.
The specific mechanics detailed in the book are highly concerning. The text alleges that these institutes are actively used to monitor the activities of Chinese international students studying abroad.
Maintaining a watchful eye to ensure they don't engage with dissident groups or absorb democratic ideologies.
Furthermore, the institutes are accused of actively suppressing speech on foreign campuses.
Because universities become dependent on the funding and language resources the institutes provide, the book argues that Hanban uses that financial leverage to quietly mandate self-censorship on politically sensitive topics.
If a university wants to keep the funding, they are pressured to cancel guest speakers or alter curricula regarding issues like Taiwan, Tibet, or the human rights abuses against the Uyghurs.
The author frames this as a long-term strategic play. By establishing a safe enclave for the state's preferred political narratives within prestigious foreign universities, they are shaping the worldview of the student body.
These students are the future diplomats, journalists, and business leaders of the host nation.
The text argues that this is a systemic intelligence investment designed to cultivate long-term sympathetic influence among the next generation of global policymakers.
But the human element of this strategy isn't restricted to researchers and university students.
No, Whitmore dives into the dark, devastating reality of traditional human intelligence, humine, through a specific, highly damaging case study.
The recruitment of Jerry Chun-Shing Lee.
The Jerry Chun-Shing Lee case is a masterclass in the catastrophic consequences of a compromised insider. Lee was a former CIA case officer with depth knowledge of the agency's operations.
The book details how, after leaving the agency and experiencing financial difficulties, he was identified, targeted, and successfully recruited by Chinese intelligence officers.
The fallout from his betrayal is difficult to overstate. According to the analysis in the text, the information Lee handed over provided Chinese counterintelligence with the precise operational details needed to systematically dismantle the CIA's entire covert human network operating within China at the time.
We're talking about the exposure of dozens of highly placed sources, resulting in their imprisonment or execution. The U.S. was essentially blinded in the region for years.
Whitmore uses the Lee case to vividly illustrate the deadly intersection of human frailty and aggressive geopolitical rivalry.
It serves as a stark reminder that the digital and human realms are not separate. You can construct the most sophisticated, zero-trust cybersecurity architecture in the world.
But if an insider who already possesses the highest level of clearance is compromised, whether through financial coercion or ideological alignment, the entire security apparatus collapses from within.
The book argues that the intelligence model being analyzed is masterful at integrating these disciplines, creating a lethal feedback loop.
Cyber theft informs the targeting of human recruits, and human recruits provide the passwords and access needed for further cyber exploitation.
Which provides a seamless transition into the next major pillar of Whitmore's analysis, the weaponization of civilian infrastructure.
If the Thousand Talents program turns university labs into intelligence pipelines and compromised insiders dismantle spy networks, the book argues that global commercial infrastructure initiatives are designed to turn entire sovereign nations into massive, passive surveillance platforms.
The prime, highly publicized example the text explores is the intense global controversy surrounding Huawei and the international rollout of 5G telecommunications networks.
For years, the public debate around Huawei was primarily framed through an economic lens: market subsidies, unfair competition.
But Whitmore's text completely discards the economic argument and presents a strictly intelligence-focused analysis.
The book claims that telecommunications networks constructed and operated by state-linked entities act as a permanent systemic intelligence vector.
We have to understand what 5G actually represents. It isn't just about downloading a movie to your phone faster.
5G is the foundational architecture for the next century of human activity. It is the ultra-low latency network that will connect the entire Internet of Things.
It will manage the flow of municipal power grids, route the data for autonomous vehicle fleets, coordinate emergency response services.
The text argues that if an adversarial state controls the physical core routing equipment, the actual hardware processing the data, then every single phone call, every encrypted data exchange, and every smart city sensor becomes potentially accessible at the hardware level.
The author details the strategic implications of this dependency. The book even references whistleblower testimonies regarding the alleged presence of shadow agents embedded within Huawei's corporate structure.
These are described as employees whose primary loyalty is not to corporate shareholders, but to state intelligence directives.
Working to ensure the technology facilitates the insertion of covert surveillance tools or hidden software backdoors that can be activated on command.
Furthermore, the text expands this concept of infrastructure dominance by directly linking the telecommunications expansion to the massive Belt and Road Initiative, or the BRI.
If you read standard economic analysis, the BRI is often celebrated as the largest global economic development project in history.
Financing highways, deep water ports, and railway networks across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. But Whitmore's analysis casts the entire initiative under a deeply suspicious strategic light.
The author fundamentally redefines the BRI, referring to it as infrastructure as intelligence platforms.
Let's examine the deepwater ports the book highlights, such as the port of Gwadar in Pakistan or the massive logistics hubs in Djibouti.
On paper, these are strictly commercial ventures meant to facilitate global shipping. But the text argues they are designed with dual-use intentions.
Built from the ground up with hidden SIGINT signals intelligence capabilities.
By controlling the port infrastructure, the state is positioned to monitor global maritime traffic, intercept regional electronic communications, and establish physical logistics footholds capable of projecting naval military power.
The concept of dual-use infrastructure is central to the book's thesis. A commercial port handles cargo containers, but it also provides a god's-eye view of global supply chain vulnerabilities.
A newly financed state-of-the-art highway corridor facilitates trade, but it also features optical fiber networks and camera checkpoints that can monitor the movement of populations.
And critically, the book focuses heavily on energy infrastructure. It points out that the modern power grids built in developing nations under the BRI umbrella are routinely linked with Chinese SCADA systems.
SCADA stands for Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. These are the highly complex industrial control systems that actually manage the physical operation of a power plant or a water treatment facility.
And the text explicitly states that installing these specific SCADA systems grants remote visibility and potential operational control over a partner country's critical energy infrastructure.
Think about the strategic leverage that provides. In the event of a geopolitical crisis, that constitutes a literal kill switch dependency.
You have the theoretical capability to turn off a sovereign nation's power grid from thousands of miles away without firing a shot.
It really brings to mind a modern macroeconomic Trojan horse scenario.
A developing nation desperately needs modernization. They accept a heavily subsidized 5G network or a free deep water port, thinking they are securing their economic future.
But in doing so, the book argues, they inadvertently hand over the keys to their national sovereignty and the total data privacy of their citizens.
The concrete and the fiber optic cables themselves become a permanent physical foothold for foreign intelligence collection.
This specific concept, the exportation of both the physical and digital infrastructure required for mass surveillance, is what Whitmore calls the digital Silk Road.
And analyzing this export strategy leads us directly to the final synthesis of the book's entire thesis, the realization of the global intelligence model.
This is where the author forcefully brings every single thread we have discussed together.
Throughout this deep dive, we have examined distinct tactics. Cyber intrusions like Aurora and OPM, industrial espionage of the F-35, academic infiltration via the Thousand Talents program, and the infrastructure dominance of the Belt and Road.
Whitmore argues emphatically that it is a fatal flaw to view these as separate, siloed campaigns. They are not. They are a single, synchronized organism.
Cyber capabilities provide the raw data sets. Human agents on the ground contextualize and exploit that data.
And global influence operations shape the political environment to ensure that this entire cycle can continue operating without facing organized international resistance.
It is a unified framework executing a long-term strategic vision. And to understand the ultimate endpoint of this vision, the book points our attention inward, examining the internal surveillance regimes currently deployed in regions like Xinjiang and Hong Kong.
The text describes an evolution of control that is almost dystopian in its efficiency. In Xinjiang, the book details the deployment of a total surveillance state targeting the Uyghur population.
It involves the integration of AI-enabled mass video surveillance, mandatory biometric tracking, DNA harvesting, and predictive policing algorithms that analyze a citizen's behavior to determine if they might hold dissident thoughts in the future.
In Hong Kong, the book describes a similar fusion of capabilities. It details how cyber surveillance, technological data mining, and newly imposed legal instruments were seamlessly fused together to systematically dismantle the pro-democracy protest movements.
But Whitmore's most alarming point is that these highly refined internal systems of control are no longer staying internal.
Through the mechanism of the digital Silk Road, this exact architecture of authoritarian control, the advanced facial recognition cameras, the internet filtering firewalls, the massive data mining servers, is being actively exported globally.
The book argues that this intelligence apparatus is supplying turnkey, ready-made surveillance solutions to other developing or authoritarian nations around the world.
On the surface, it is a lucrative commercial export, but strategically, it effectively helps other regimes surveil and control their own populations while quietly embedding the platforms required for Chinese intelligence gathering deep into the infrastructure of the global south.
It paints an incredibly dark, complex picture of the modern geopolitical landscape. So, after hundreds of pages of detailing these breaches, what is the definitive message Whitmore leaves us with?
The text concludes that in an era where the concept of information itself has been weaponized, our traditional defense postures and Cold War mentalities are entirely obsolete.
We cannot protect ourselves simply by trying to build higher digital firewalls or by relying on the deterrence of conventional aircraft carriers.
The author argues that knowledge, operational clarity, and completely shedding our institutional naivete about the blurring of civilian and military lines are our very first and most important lines of defense.
We cannot hope to counter a strategy until we fully comprehend the architecture of the threat. The author essentially provides a diagnostic toolkit for policymakers and the public.
The goal is to move society past that initial nebulous anxiety and replace it with informed, vigilant pragmatism.
Accepting Whitmore's thesis requires a fundamental, painful rethinking of how Western democracies view international academic collaboration, the security of global supply chains, and critical technology procurement.
Which brings up a profound underlying question for you, the person listening to this analysis right now.
How do we, as citizens of open democratic societies, balance our desire to live in a globally collaborative world with the harsh, documented reality that our very openness is the primary vulnerability being targeted and exploited?
It is arguably the defining security and philosophical dilemma of the 21st century. How do you defend an open society against an adversary that uses your openness as a weapon without destroying the very openness you are trying to protect?
And grappling with that dilemma leaves us with a final, highly provocative thought, one that extends even beyond the immediate scope of Whitmore's text. We have spent this time talking about the historical theft of billions of personal records, detailed psychological profiles from security clearances, and vast databases of biometric markers.
As modern artificial intelligence systems become increasingly hungry for massive data sets to train their predictive behavioral models, we have to ask a terrifying question.
What happens when the next generation of advanced AI algorithms is trained directly on the exact psychological profiles, biometric data, and stolen secrets of the millions of global citizens we discussed today?
What unprecedented level of predictive behavioral control and societal manipulation does that enable?
It suggests a near-future scenario where the goal of covert operations evolves. It moves from simply collecting static data to actively, autonomously manipulating human behavior and political outcomes on a global scale, all in real time. To quickly recap the journey of our analysis today, we started in the digital trenches, examining the paradigm-shifting tradecraft of the Aurora cyber hacks and the devastating human data harvests of OPM and Marriott. We moved into the physical realm, exploring the supply chain vulnerabilities that allowed the theft of defense secrets like the F-35. We navigated the complex human terrain of academic infiltration via programs like the Thousand Talents, and we ended with the sobering realization that global development initiatives like 5G and the Belt and Road are functioning as a vast, interconnected intelligence platform, fundamentally altering the balance of global power. We've reached the end of this analysis. If this episode added value to your day, please leave a like, share it, and subscribe to Strategic Labs so we can keep deconstructing narratives. Remember to check the video description. See you in the next analysis.